A boy in Spain draws his first paintings before most children can even read.
He will go on to create more than 50,000 works of art in his lifetime.
He once said it took him years to learn to paint like a child again.
One single painting of his became a symbol of war and human suffering.
His name was Pablo Picasso. He changed the direction of art forever.
Malaga, Spain, October 25, 1881. A baby boy is born. His name is Pablo Ruiz Picasso. His father, Jose, is an art teacher who paints birds and animals for a living. From the time Pablo is 7 years old, his father teaches him to draw and paint seriously. Pablo shows incredible talent almost immediately. By the age of 13, he is already producing real oil paintings, not just simple sketches. Some stories claim his father gave up painting himself after seeing how skilled his son had become. Whether that story is exactly true or not, it captures how exceptional Pablo's talent really was. In 1892, the family moves again, this time to a coastal city called La Coruña. A year later, Pablo is accepted into the local School of Fine and Applied Arts. Teachers there quickly realize they are dealing with a student far beyond his years. When Pablo is around 13, his younger sister Conchita becomes seriously ill with a disease called diphtheria. She dies shortly after. It's a devastating loss for the entire family. Soon afterward, the family moves to Barcelona, a city Pablo will love for the rest of his life. In Barcelona, Pablo studies at the City School of Fine Arts. His father even convinces officials to let him take the entrance exam for the advanced class. Pablo passes with ease, far ahead of where most students his age would be. Despite his obvious talent, Pablo grows bored with strict academic training. He eventually leaves formal art school completely, choosing to learn through experimentation instead. In 1900, Pablo travels to Paris for the very first time. Paris, at this moment in history, is the center of the entire art world. He lives a difficult, often broke existence in cheap apartments shared with other struggling artists. Some nights, he and his friends burn his own drawings just to stay warm. It's a far cry from the wealth and fame that will come later in his life. A year later, in 1901, a gallery on a famous street gives him his first real exhibition. He is only 19 years old and still relatively unknown outside of Barcelona. Around this same time, Pablo starts signing his work with a single name, Picasso. It's simpler and easier for people across different countries to remember. But not everything in Pablo's life is going well. He struggles with poverty during these years. A close friend of his takes his own life, a loss that affects Pablo deeply. Pablo channels this sadness into his art, painting almost entirely in shades of blue. Historians later name this period the Blue Period. It lasts from around 1901 until 1904. His paintings during this time show beggars, poor families, and isolated figures. The mood is heavy, but the technical skill on display is impossible to ignore. Slowly, Pablo's life and his art both begin to brighten. Around 1904, his style shifts into what historians call the Rose Period. His paintings now feature circus performers, acrobats, and clowns, painted in warmer colors. Around this same time, he settles permanently in Paris and becomes part of a lively circle of artists and writers. He befriends poets, critics, and fellow painters who gather nightly in cheap Parisian cafes. These conversations shape his thinking constantly, even when they have nothing directly to do with painting. One close friend, the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, becomes one of the earliest public defenders of his strange new work. Then, around 1907, Pablo's work takes its most radical turn yet. He becomes fascinated by African mask art and the work of painter Paul Cézanne. That year, he completes a painting that shocks even his closest friends. It shows 5 women with sharp, angular, mask-like faces, completely unlike anything in traditional European painting. Many historians consider this single work the true starting point of modern art. Inspired by these influences, Pablo starts breaking objects and figures into geometric shapes, triangles, squares, fragmented angles that don't look like anything painted before. This new style eventually becomes known as Cubism, one of the most important art movements of the century. Pablo, along with fellow painter Georges Braque, essentially invents it together. The two painters work so closely during these years that their paintings are sometimes hard to tell apart. They view objects from multiple angles at once, then reassemble them onto a flat canvas. It completely breaks the rules of traditional perspective that had shaped Western art for centuries. At first, critics and the public are confused, even shocked by these strange new paintings. But slowly, Cubism gains serious respect within the art world. Pablo keeps evolving his Cubist style for years, eventually adding collage and mixed materials into his work. He glues newspaper, fabric, and other objects directly onto his canvases. Art historians later call this phase synthetic cubism, separate from the earlier, more fragmented analytic cubism. Instead of breaking objects apart completely, Pablo now builds them back up using flat shapes and real materials. It's a surprisingly playful approach for an art movement that once seemed so serious and intellectual. Throughout his life, Pablo has several long, intense relationships with different women. Many of them appear directly in his paintings, immortalized in his ever-changing artistic style. Each new relationship often coincides with a noticeable shift in his artistic style. Some art historians track his entire career partly through the women who inspired him at each stage. These relationships are often passionate, but also famously difficult and emotionally complicated. He marries twice and has 4 children with 3 different women across his lifetime. His personal life is often as dramatic and complicated as his art. When World War I breaks out in 1914, many artists Pablo knows leave Paris to fight. As a Spanish citizen living in France, Pablo isn't required to join the war himself. He spends the war years mostly in his studio, continuing to paint while the world around him changes completely. In the 1930s, war breaks out in Pablo's home country of Spain. The Spanish Civil War divides the nation and brings tremendous suffering to ordinary people. Pablo, living safely in Paris, follows the news from his homeland with growing horror. He has long supported the elected government, which is now fighting for its survival against fascist forces. In 1937, a small Spanish town called Guernica is bombed by warplanes during the conflict. Civilians are killed. The destruction shocks people far beyond Spain's borders. Pablo responds the only way he truly knows how. He paints. The result is an enormous, haunting work simply called Guernica. The painting shows twisted, suffering figures, rendered only in black, white, and gray. It becomes one of the most powerful anti-war statements in the entire history of art. Pablo refuses to let the painting return to Spain while the country remains under dictatorship. For decades, Guernica travels between museums in other countries instead, as a kind of political exile. It only returns to Spain years after Pablo's own death, once democracy is restored there. Guernica travels the world for years, raising awareness about the horror of war. It remains one of Pablo's most studied and most reproduced works today. During World War II, Pablo stays in Paris while the city is occupied by enemy forces. Many other artists flee, but Pablo continues working quietly through the entire war. Occupying officials reportedly visit his studio at times, curious about his famous, controversial work. One officer allegedly asks him about Guernica and whether Pablo himself made it. Pablo is said to have replied simply, "No, you did." A sharp, quiet act of defiance under dangerous circumstances. After the war ends, Pablo's life enters a new, lighter chapter. He experiments with ceramics painting, and playful reinterpretations of famous works by other artists. In the south of France, he visits a small pottery town and becomes completely absorbed in the craft. Over the following years, he creates thousands of ceramic plates, vases, and sculptural pieces. It's a surprising late-career passion for a man already considered one of the greatest painters alive. He moves to the south of France, where warm light and a slower pace of life suit him well. Even in his final decades, his creative energy barely slows down at all. He becomes something close to a living legend, visited by famous writers, photographers, and fellow artists. Documentary filmmakers even capture him painting directly onto glass, so the camera can film his technique from behind. The public becomes fascinated not just with his art, but with the man himself. Across his entire lifetime, Pablo produces over 50,000 works. Paintings, drawings, sculptures, prints, and ceramics, spanning roughly 80 years of constant creation. Generations of later artists across nearly every style and movement point to Pablo as a major influence. Museums around the world still build entire exhibitions around just one period of his enormous body of work. His paintings now sell for some of the highest prices ever recorded at art auctions. Pablo Picasso dies in 1973 at the age of 91, still working until nearly the very end. By then, he is widely considered one of the most influential artists of the entire 20th century. So here's a question for you. Which period of Picasso's art do you find most interesting? Write your answer in the comments below. I'm John. Thank you for learning English with me today.